Hey there folks, Blockbuster Beach Bum here, and here's the third part of our Planet of the Apes retrospective before later this week I visit Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, the latest film in the Apes franchise. But before I start that, I'm going to be discussing the 2001 Planet of the Apes starring Mark Wahlberg and directed by Tim Burton, and the 2011 reboot Rise of the Planet of the Apes. So, the Apes franchise ended in 1973, and there were, discussions about making another one. And then in 2001, we got one of Tim Burton's infamous remakes. Among them including Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which is not a film I'm very fond of, and I'm not very fond of this film either. I have a weird history of this film. This was actually the first Apes film I remember watching, and I saw this in the theater as a kid. I remember in 2001 seeing this in that summer, like late July, and I remember thinking to myself, I hate this movie. I couldn't describe why I hated it as a kid. Generally when you're a kid and you see something like a fantasy sort of thing, you're like, yeah, that's awesome! And I'm like, I just don't care. And that was my reaction back then. And that's still my reaction today. Now this movie basically, in many ways follows the Apes plot, in that you have a human who goes to Earth in the future and, realizes it's Earth, but if I remember correctly, it's like towards the beginning he does that. The thing is with this movie, I forget so many details because it's not a very memorable movie. Mark Wahlberg as a leading man in the movie, I was talking about him in Transformers saying he was an improvement. In this film, he's a detriment. He's just not the greatest. I don't really care about him in the movie. Not in the same way I did Charlton Heston. Like, Charlton Heston had a really interesting arc in Planet of the Apes. This one, Mark Wahlberg doesn't really have much of an arc. It also doesn't help that I really don't care about any of the human characters. Chris Christopherson's one of them, and he's just there. Another chick is there. They're all kind of forgettable. I don't really care about them. Like, the thing is, with Planet of the Apes, the original, had such a nice build-up. This movie doesn't have really that good of a build-up, and it just kind of just goes there. Goes to the, apes immediately. I will say this about the Apes makeup, it's really impressive when you think about it, because it's like a nice combination of like people in ape makeup actually looking like apes, and also, being like slightly fantastical, slightly beyond our world, so to speak. Tim Roth is in the movie, and he plays General Thade, and he's fine in the movie. There's certain stances and like grunts and stuff that he does that are fine. Michael Clark Duncan's fine in the movie. Helena Bonham Carter as Ari, she's a fine female ape character. She's not Dr. Zira by any stretch of the imagination, so that doesn't really work out. Charlton Heston has a cameo, and a lot of people really hate his cameo in this movie. Personally, I was okay with it, and I thought it served the film in a way, kind of talking about like the prophecy about humans and such. It just kind of worked. It was a nice little reversal. Trouble is, it's just the movie itself isn't very good, because it's kind of retreading the same things over again, but just less interestingly, I mean, there's some, like I said, the makeup and the production design is really cool, and you do get the sense of like an ape society. A little more akin to the book, but still more to the original movie. Let's see, anything else I really think of? Paul Giamatti in the film is really good at this, as this like ape slaver guy, and he's kind of the comedic relief. And he's the best part of the whole movie. He steals the show, in my opinion. But outside of that, that's really it. And this movie has an infamous ending, but not in like a good way. It has one of those infamous endings that you kind of chuckle at the end, because it's just so damn silly. It's basically, he goes back to the future, and he sees that General Thade has his own statue, but like is like the Lincoln Memorial, and that was like, what? really now. It's like that's what happens when you try to top something. You kind of jump over it and fail. So this movie is ambitious in some areas, but it's just retreading the same ground as the original film. So there's not much else I can really say about this film except it's It might be my least favorite out of all of the Apes films. However, 10 years later, in the summer of 2011, we got the reboot prequel, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which is loosely inspired by Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, where we have a ape named Caesar, played by legendary motion cap actor Andy Serkis, who was born, whose mother was part of an experiment using a drug called ALZ-112, which is an Alzheimer's drug. It enhances intelligence, especially in chimpanzees and like the other great apes and such. And he is obviously super intelligent, but he can't really fit in. Something happens where he's put into an ape sanctuary. He eventually leads the apes out of the ape sanctuary and the zoos, and you know, they kind of, at the very end of the film, they form their own little ape society. Now, I personally am a fan of Conquest, but I understand there are a lot of people who don't like Conquest of the Planet of the Apes for some reason. I don't know. But this might be one of the few examples in movie history, one of the very few, where they remake a movie that most people don't consider to be very good and actually remake it well. What I mean by that is, whenever I hear people like posing arguments against remakes, they generally say, why don't they just remake bad movies? Now, in some ways, that seems obvious. You wouldn't want to remake a bad movie generally, you know? I mean, unless it was like a property like Transformers or like a massive, massive property. But the thing is with Apes, in terms of the story, they build on Conquest and make it into its own thing. So that's why Rise of the Planet of the Apes really works as its own movie. Now, let me talk about some of the negative stuff I didn't like about the movie. The action scene is, at the end, while entertaining, and I appreciate the level of restraint they had, is sloppy in the sense that the apes could have just went under the bridge. Because it takes place on the Golden Gate Bridge, all these apes, you know, big, kind of a semi-big Hollywood family, but not like the Avengers or outrageous things like in Transformers. But, you know, they could have just went underneath the bridge and just tried to get to, you know, the Redwood Forest, which is kind of ultimately their goal in the movie. But then again, you wouldn't have a movie, you gotta have fight scenes, I understand that. There's certain things I'm allowed to suspend my disbelief for. Also, you have the humans, like, trying to fire on the apes, and you're like, why didn't they just bring in a better military or better, like, armed force against the apes? My response to that is this. You gotta, again, a suspension of disbelief is required to a certain extent, but I understand it's kind of ridiculous because the only excuse you can come up with is they didn't take the apes seriously enough. You know, it's just a bunch of apes. You're like, okay, fine, you send up a small group, and I imagine they're going to be more, as the trailers have indicated in Dawn, they're going to be more militarily prepared, I mean the humans, against the ape threat. So that's kind of a problem. But then again, like, they could have included, like, maybe, like, the animal rights activists trying to say, no, you can't do this. But they didn't do that, so that's kind of a strike against the film. And then one more thing that I really didn't care for was the fact that in the very beginning of the movie, Caesar's mother, Bright Eyes, a nice throwback to the nickname that Charlton Heston earned in the first Planet of the Apes movie, was shot down, shot dead. And she was, like, really angry. And we find out it's because she's trying to protect her baby Caesar. How the hell didn't these, like, chimpanzee experts know that she had a, you know, chimpanzee? Unless having a baby chimpanzee is, like, the most quiet birth process in the universe. Or that, how did they not know that she was pregnant? You know, wouldn't that, like, come across in your mind somehow? I don't know. I'm not an animal expert or a doctor, but I would presume that they would take steps like that to figure these things out. So I'm like, these are the worst ape handlers in the world. But aside from those problems, the only other thing I can think of is that the human characters. Some of the human characters are flat, like James Franco's human characters. Like, he's okay. He's not terrible, but he exists for the plot. And Frida Pinto's in there. She's great in Slumdog Millionaire, but she doesn't do much here except be, like, a hot girlfriend. Brian Cox in here, I wish he was in, like, he was used as, like, a villain in the next movie, because he's a great villain actor. You know, I love him in X2, and they use him in here, and he's fine. The kid who plays Draco Malfoy, Tom Felton, he is very unlikable in the movie. And the best human character I could say is John Lithgow's performance. He's a Alzheimer's patient, who's James Franco's father in the film, and there's some really nice silent moments between them that I felt were rather heartwarming. However, the best part of this movie is Andy Serkis as Caesar. This is some of like the best like motion capture or like best realized special effects I've seen in a movie, because it isn't just like cities exploding or you know, giant monsters ripping each other's throats out. These are like apes. These are like things we see on a not day-to-day basis, but we could see them in like a zoo or a National Geographic documentary or Animal Planet or whatever. And we look at it and we say, that's a pretty darn realistic ape. I feel there's like one or two effects in the movie that don't work out for me, such as the Bright Eyes. Bright Eyes was a horrible looking visual effect in my opinion. But with Caesar, it feels fluid, it feels real, it works. And that's partly due to not only Weta's technology, but also Andy Serkis as an actor. He knows how to work motion capture to his advantage. And you really do see his facial expressions and his mannerisms come through in the performance. Like, people tend to doubt motion capture sometimes because they think it's more of a visual effects thing, and yeah, a lot of it is the visual effects, but I think you have to have a really good actor behind the motion capture in order to get a compelling performance. And that's why I think, you know, Andy Serkis really is the man for all of these characters like Gollum, King Kong, and Caesar. I also can't wait for him in Star Wars Episode 7 or Avengers 2. But he has some really great moments as Caesar in the film. That I feel work, especially when anything he's talking, the visual effects, it kind of works out. There's a moment in the film where he says no. This is like the first line that he has in the movie in terms of like verbal, you know, words. When Thomas Felton's like, "Take your stinking paws off me, damn dirty ape," and he's like trying to fight against him, and he says no. And some people looked at it as ridiculous, but I felt the movie earned that right. They had enough build up to that moment. And I felt Caesar, probably with the ALZ-112 and also eventually the ALZ-113, the other drug that he uses on his fellow apes, would have advanced him a little bit, or given him more clarity, I guess you could say. And I really have to say, I did enjoy Andy Serkis' performance in the film. You know, he's just fantastic, and you really feel this character is such a conflicted thing, because he spent so much time with humans, but at the same time, the apes are his people. Then you have to talk about the other apes in the film. You have Maurice, who's like the orangutan in the film. Maurice is, of course, a send-up to the Morris Evans character. Morris Evans played Dr. Zaius in the original and Beneath the Planet of the Apes. And Maurice feels more like the character of Virgil from Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which, interestingly enough, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes feels more like Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which is awesome. I like that they're kind of like retreading like the more obscure Apes titles. Rocket, he's kind of the alpha male, and then Caesar kind of like, look, you can't do this. And then you have Buck. Buck is given like one of the best death scenes I've ever seen in the film. They're trying to shoot at Caesar from a helicopter, and he pushes Caesar out of the way, jumps at the helicopter, and beats up the guys. The helicopter explodes, but he has a couple shots at him, and Caesar's like holding him in his arms. There's no dialogue between them, but you just see like Caesar just trying to console him like before his death, and you know, and Buck dies. So that was a really like a great moment. Especially, it's like no dialogue required or anything like that. It was just the expressions of the ape characters that worked so well in that scene. But like I said, while this movie does have its problems, it successfully relaunches the Apes franchise in a direction that was unexpected, but also welcomed. And this movie has made the Planet of the Apes franchise relevant again, and I wish much success to Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, because not only, you know, did this get good reviews, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is currently getting a lot of really good stuff. Good reviews, I mean. And it's got a 95% Rotten Tomatoes. It's going to go down a little bit, but I think if you're that high, like a few days before your release in terms of your Rotten Tomatoes percentage, you're bound to be a really good movie. So next time I talk to you about the Apes franchise, I'll be discussing my thoughts on Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Till next time.